Chapter 4. The quote-unquote Seth voice. All during this time, I was working at the local art gallery in the afternoons. Mornings I spent on my ESP book, writing up the results of our experiments. We still hadn't told anyone what we were doing, except our friend Bill. In fact, few of our friends even knew what we were up to until the book was out. Now I wonder why we were so secretive, but at the time it seemed much better to keep the world with all of its questions out. We had enough of our own to consider. Seth's personality was expressing itself much more freely now that it was released from the board, particularly after the surprising 14th session. I don't think Rob will ever forget it. We were still astonished by the fact of the sessions themselves. I was nervous before we started, wondering whether Seth would come through or not. In those days, I was always afraid that I'd go into trance, open my mouth, and nothing. Or worse, gibberish. Besides, I wasn't even aware of how I knew Seth was ready. We began sessions at 9 p.m. 5 minutes before 9, I'd get that feeling again, that I was going to leap from a high diving board into a deep pool, and without knowing for sure whether or not I could swim. The session began as usual, with no hint of the voice changes that would occur. I'd like to mention here that by now we had read several books on extrasensory perception, but still hadn't come across anything about voice communication. We'd read about the Patience Worth case, where a Mrs. Curran produced novels and poetry through the Ouija board and automatic writing, but we were completely unfamiliar with the idea of anyone speaking for another personality. It had never occurred to either of us that my voice might change in any way. In this 14th session, I spoke for Seth for 50 minutes straight, the longest period without a break up to that date. Seth began by advising us to have a more balanced social life, to go out more and mix with people, so as to counter the intense inner activity of psychic experience. Then he launched into his first discussion of the inner senses, a subject which was entirely new to us. It was to be elaborated upon in the future. Everything on your plane is the materialization of something that exists independently of your plane. Therefore, within your senses, there are other senses that perceive inward. Your regular senses perceive an outer world. The senses within the recognizable senses perceive and create an inner world. Once you exist on a particular plane, you must necessarily be attuned to it while blocking out many other perceptions. It is a sort of psychic focus, a concentration of awareness upon certain lines. As your ability grows in relation to the environment, then you can afford to look around, use the inner senses, and enlarge your scope of activity. This is only natural. Survival on a particular plane depends upon your concentration within it. When survival is more or less satisfied through attention, then you can afford to perceive other realities. Actually, this material went on for several pages. As usual, Rob was writing as quickly as he could to keep up with the delivery. Resuming into the session's second hour, my voice had sounded progressively more hoarse, and it was the first time in sessions that it had ever shown signs of strain. After the initial discussion of the inner senses, Seth said, "I did not intend to make you work so hard this evening, Joseph. If your hand is working as quickly as Rupert's mouth, you must be exhausted. Would you like to take a break or end the session? I am always thinking of your convenience, at least when I am not concerned with your education," he added with a smile. Rob asked for a break, but then he urged me to end the session before my voice gave out. I knew that he was concerned about me, but also tremendously interested in the material Seth had been giving. Besides this, as Seth, I had been extremely active, making funny remarks now and then to break up pages of serious monologue. The sense of another independent personality was stronger than it had ever been, and so I decided to continue. But now it was after 10:30. While we were talking, Rob had wondered aloud about the meaning of time. When we resumed, Seth started discussing this question. Time has no meaning without barriers. To put it another way, time has no meaning without the necessity to counteract against other actions. Basically, this is a gem of a description if I do say so myself. The sad part is that you probably won't be able to understand it yet. It all takes time. As I try to counteract your ignorance, I couldn't resist. I mean it kindly, for you have no idea of the difficulties involved in explaining time to someone who must take time to understand the explanation. The study of time will teach you much about the nature of fifth dimension also. Our imaginary wires composed of solidified vitality are fluid. I hope you understand this, even while they are solidified, for solidity is an illusion. Here, as Seth, I pounded on the desk for emphasis, and suddenly began speaking in a stronger voice. At the same time, the hoarseness disappeared. Word by word, the voice grew deeper, more formal, louder. As Rob looked down to take his notes, he realized that a vocal metamorphosis of some kind was taking place. He wrote as fast as he could, so he could also look up now and then to see what was going on. Now I almost stood in front of him, the un-Jane-like open eyes staring at him as if to make sure he understood what was being said. I have also said that this feeling of vitality, and I prefer that term, vitality, is moving and itself a part of the living stuff of the universe. Now, as these wires pass seemingly from plane to plane, they actually form the boundaries of each plane and become subject to the particular laws within each. Therefore, they become subject to time within your particular three-dimensional system. During the last passage, the voice became louder and louder, as though it were trying to fill a good-sized hall. I'm reading that session, of course, as I write this chapter, and I've just come across Rob's original notes, scribbled in between this passage and the next. They show his reaction rather clearly. Looking at Jane, and knowing her natural feminine voice so well, I had to think twice to realize that this other new voice was issuing from her in such volume, and with no strain at all. I don't know whether I was more surprised at the fact that Jane seemed not at all disturbed by this voice, or by the fact that it had such a definite, deep, and masculine tone. Rob had little time to make extra notes, though, as the passage continued without pause. The motion of the apparently solidified vitality gives the illusion of time. The counteraction involved in this case is counteraction within the core of vitality itself, in much the same manner that we spoke of a closed mental enclosure earlier. The action and counteraction is the time trigger. On some other planes, motion is simultaneous and time unknown. To me, your time can be manipulated. It is one of the several vehicles by which I can enter your awareness. Now, as an example of my good intentions, I will end this session. I would continue if I did not have your physical limitations to contend with. I am able to come through very well this evening, and when this happens, I like to take advantage of it. After all, do you blame me? In any case, I shall say good night. You should know that I too enjoy a moment of social discourse, or I would not keep you so long. I regret the necessity to keep Joseph so occupied. Good night, dear friends. Instantly, my voice returned to normal. The hoarseness had long since disappeared. Now it was almost impossible for us to end the session. We were too intrigued. Despite Seth's parting words, I could quote-unquote feel him still present, along with a tremendous sense of vitality and goodwill. Rob told me about the heavy masculine voice with its astonishing volume, and all around me I felt this high energy and great humor, as if an invisible Seth were sitting there, smiling, ready to start a friendly chat. As soon as we decided to continue, that deep voice boomed out of me again, and as Seth, I began walking about the room, pausing to speak directly to Rob or to look out the window. I really felt that someone else was settling down inside my body, getting used to moving it about, and glowing with satisfaction at the achievement. I enjoy speaking with you for a few moments about what you might be pleased to call